Welcome to Pretty Lies and Alibis. Let's seek the truth and travel the long road to justice together. What you know, Alibis? Welcome to another episode of Pretty Lies and Alibis. I'm Gigi. Good to have you here. It is Wednesday. Yes, I had to look in the corner of my computer screen to be sure. Day one of the Alec Baldwin trial. We're going to jump into a recap of what happened today. But first, if you're watching on YouTube, you know the drill. Don't forget to hit subscribe if you haven't already. Like the video, share it with your friends, and you can ring my bell if you want notifications of when I post new content. Click that little bell icon. Music fact of the day, the song Carolina in My Mind was written by James Taylor. He was homesick. He was overseas. Paul McCartney is credited as playing bass on that song. Did not know that. We had openings and the first few witnesses today in Alec Baldwin's involuntary manslaughter trial. His wife and his brother, Stephen, were in attendance. Just a reminder, the armorer, Hannah Gutierrez Reed, was on trial earlier this year and found guilty of involuntary manslaughter and sentenced to 18 months. She is currently serving that sentence. Let's jump right into openings from the state. They say when someone plays make-believe with guns, people's lives are in danger and someone can be killed. It's very simple. Someone who played make-believe with a real gun and violated the cardinal rule of gun safety was Alec Baldwin. In fall of 2021, Rust began filming, and it was a Western with a lot of gun action. While it was a movie set, it was on a very tight budget. Some of the people hired were inexperienced, and one was the armorer, Hannah Gutierrez Reed. You'll hear from crew members from the set who will say her inexperience was obvious. This workplace had talented people. One was a vibrant 42-year-old rising star named Helena Hutchins. There are people who act in a reckless manner in any workplace, placing people in danger. That was the defendant, Alec Baldwin, the lead actor. He arrived on set October 13th, and prior to arriving, he requested to be assigned the biggest gun available, a replica 1873 replica revolver. You'll hear from the manufacturer. He will explain the quality control measures they use to ensure the firearms do not have any issues. This firearm was in perfect working condition. EMF is a company out of California that is known to provide firearms to the movie industry. When they received the firearm, it was in perfect working condition and was subject to several quality control tests. In September of 2021, Seth Kinney was contacted by Rust Productions to provide firearms to the filming. Mr. Kinney owns PDQ Firearms and Props. He contacted EMF and ordered several single-action replica revolvers. On September 29th, Mr. Kinney purchased this gun, and when he got it, it was in perfect working order. The only thing he did was insert a firing pin. Then the firearms were sent to the set. October 13th, Alec Baldwin was supposed to have a training session with Hannah, the armorer. He had people filming him while he's running around shooting the gun. In the days before the shooting, Baldwin handled this firearm on multiple occasions, and you will see video of it working fine. And you will see he did not do a safety check with this inexperienced armorer because he did not want to offend her. Baldwin mishandled this gun, and you'll see him use the gun to point to people and things, cock the hammer back, and put his finger on the trigger when he's not supposed to. You'll hear of numerous safety breaches with Baldwin and this weapon. You'll hear the camera crew walked out because they were concerned over safety breaches with firearms. October 21st, the day of the shooting, it started behind schedule. Miss Hutchins and Mr. Souza, who, by the way, was the director and also was injured by the same projectile that went through Miss Hutchins' body. They were talking to Alec Baldwin, instructing him to slowly take the gun out of the holster and hold it at an angle. The director will tell you the defendant will do his own thing. You will see he cocks the hammer. They break for lunch and come back to do blocking. Miss Hutchins wanted to work out the details of the moves of the actor. One witness will testify Baldwin was playing with his gun in the church. The armorer brought the gun into the church and showed David Halls, the first assistant director, and it was empty. She was given the gun back and loaded it with dummy rounds. Dummy rounds look real, but it's easy to tell they're not because they rattle when shaken. Hannah shows the weapon to the first assistant director quickly and misses one round. That round was a real round. Hannah handed the gun to Baldwin, and once again, he failed to do a safety check with the armorer. He takes the firearm puts it in his holster, and the defendant again did his own thing. You'll hear from Mr. Jorgensen. He's been involved in drafting movie set safety rules, which requires every actor to treat weapons as if it was loaded. Never point it at someone and never put your finger on the trigger. Mr. Baldwin again violated those safety rules. He was told to slowly take it out. He took it out first and pointed it. His finger is on or around the trigger. Again, he takes it out quickly a second time, his finger again on or around the trigger. The third and fatal time, he cocks the hammer, points it at Miss Hutchins, and sends that live bullet into her body. It was a 45 caliber round that went through her arm, lacerated her spine, and went through Joel Souza's shoulder. You'll see the aftermath of the shooting. Medics frantically working to stabilize her and airlift her to the hospital, but the damage was too much and she bled to death. Baldwin claimed he did not pull the trigger. The evidence will show that's not possible. You'll hear from experts who will say that the gun will not discharge without pulling the trigger. Law enforcement asked the FBI for assistance. The gun and ammunition from the set were examined by a firearms and tool marks examiner. Bryce Ziegler will tell you he examined it and saw no defects or modifications. He tried the hammer in the three positions: a quarter, a half, and a fully cocked position. And it was fine. The hammer held until he pulled the trigger. He test fired the revolver 12 times, and each time the gun fired as it was designed to. He then suggested one last test, an accidental discharge test. He left that test for last because the test could damage the gun. During the test, some components were damaged. Some internal components and the hammer notch were damaged. Before this accidental discharge testing, the gun was functioning fine. You will see footage of Baldwin on set using it, showing it worked fine. And in December of 2021, after the shooting, he said the gun had no mechanical problems. You'll hear from two firearm experts who examined the revolver and damaged pieces. The damage is consistent with the testing done by the FBI. One witness examined the trigger sear in August of 2023. He saw diagonal lines on the trigger sear while looking under the microscope, and he did not know how the FBI conducted the accidental discharge testing. After talking to the FBI and found out how the accidental discharge testing was conducted, he concluded the lines would not have affected how the weapon functioned. The state wraps up by saying that the gun worked perfectly fine, and the fatal and main problem that day was Alec Baldwin. He did not do a gun safety check with the inexperienced armorer. He cocked the gun and pulled the trigger with reckless disregard for the victims. Up next was the defense for their openings, and they say this is an unspeakable tragedy, but Alec Baldwin is not guilty. He's an actor. These cardinal rules are not cardinal rules on movie sets. You've all seen gunfights in movies. People failed in their duties to ensure the safety of the weapon. How did a live round get on set? They're never on set. They use dummies that look real when you want a close up shot. You cannot tell between looking at dummy rounds and live rounds which is which is why live rounds should never be on set. He says the state will play clips showing Baldwin firing the gun to tarnish him in your eyes. There was a real bullet which should never be on set, and Alec Baldwin had nothing to do with that real bullet being on set. That live round was loaded into the firearm by the armorer. She places a live bullet into the firearm. You'll hear the state say he picked the biggest gun. He did this, he did that. This is to tarnish him in your eyes. That horrible moment when she put that live round in the gun had nothing to do with Alec Baldwin. The first assistant director, who is the head of safety, will tell you he failed to detect the live bullet. That had nothing to do with Alec Baldwin. Just on a side note, the first assistant director, Dave Halls, who was responsible for doing that second safety check, took a plea deal and got 6 months of unsupervised probation, which has wrapped up. They go on to say on a movie set, safety has to occur before it lands in the actor's hands. Cold gun was announced, meaning it had been double checked for safety. Alec's job is to act, to rehearse, memorize his lines. He's Harlan Rust. At the incident in question, he is a century away. He is an outlaw. He should be able to take that gun and use it as an actor, pull the trigger in ways that would be lethal in the real world, but not on a movie set. The defense goes on to show a clip of the scene. Baldwin is sitting on the church pew. He is bleeding and he's holding his revolver. He's going to defend himself because law enforcement has caught up with him. They ask him to rehearse over and over. There's no danger. Someone in the background says, "Nice." The scene after lunch is the same scene, but it wasn't recorded. It was so close to the camera, you could see it was loaded with dummy rounds, but one was a real bullet. No one had any idea this toxic element had been introduced. Guns are in movies because they're a part of people's lives. Armorers armor, actors act, directors direct. Safety is the first assistant director's responsibility. They yell out cold gun, that means no one need worry. No live bullets on set. It's impossible for cold guns to hurt people. You would get hurt by dropping it on your foot at worst. The armorer hands the gun to him, and it's been done on sets forever. Alex in wardrobe, they rehearse, they take lunch. Dave Halls is practicing the movement during lunch, and the cold prop gun comes back. The weapon is called out as safe. Dave Halls inspects the gun and verified it's a cold gun. Everyone relaxes. They begin rehearsing. This is routine on a movie set. He does it over and over, and nobody bats an eye. They'll tell you the investigation revealed Alec was acting on the direction of Miss Hutchins and Mr. Halls. The shot happens. He says immediately, "I didn't pull the trigger." They play the 911 call in court. Someone says it was the first assistant director's responsibility and not Alec Baldwin's. The cast and crew were frantically trying to figure out what happened. The armorer yells out, "Sorry," and they take ammo out of the gun. They go to the prop cart, they move things, empty the gun, and Sarah Zachary will tell you she threw things out. Unfortunately, Helena passes away. Police have body cams. It shows the evidence, people, and witnesses in the moment. None of them have been through anything like this before. Look at what they say and do that day. Life changes, memories change, but the preservation is there. The prop cart and ammunition is altered and messy. And at this accidental shooting, police begin to make mistakes. They don't have the prop cart in the crime scene. People are touching things. Police don't have gloves on. They don't secure the prop truck where all firearms and ammo are. It was not secured for several days. The prop house was not secured for over a month. There were a lot of mistakes. They had the live shell casings that said Starline Brass. Alec Baldwin walks up to police and says, "Whatever you need me to do, tell me where to go." Witnesses are interviewed on scene, and that's on video. They'll tell you the gun was double checked. It was a cold gun. It's not the actor's responsibility. The gun went off and no one saw him pull the trigger. It was an accident and he did not load it himself. It was the actor handling a prop. There were professionals on set, the armorer and first assistant director Dave Halls, who are over safety. They let them down. They get a search warrant for the church with no further answers in the church. The live ammunition is the mystery. How did it get on set? They execute search warrants on the prop truck a week later. And Seth Kinney, the ammunition and gun supplier, and prop master Sarah Zachary are there, but there's no answers. Sarah Zachary meets with law enforcement and says she disposed of things that day. They execute a search warrant on the PDQ prop warehouse. Seth Kinney is there and they don't find the lethal bullet. They never did. Photos come into law enforcement and they focus on Alec Baldwin. Safety proceeds before the actor. You will hear his interview, a man in shock and grief. He didn't need a lawyer because he didn't commit a crime. Actors rely on armorers and the head of safety. Dave Halls took responsibility for his lack of safety. On a movie set, you are allowed to pull the trigger. That doesn't make him guilty of homicide. He did not know the gun had a live bullet. The state is blinded by trying to disprove Alec and order the destructive test on the firearm. They try to make a big case by taking a mallet and smashing the firearm. He said he manipulated the hammer and it went off. This gun had a hair trigger, and the manual says if you load it with a live round and drop it, it can accidentally go off. They eliminate the one item that could prove what Alec believed. They destroyed it. It can't ever be tested as it was that day. There were other tests they could have done, and one expert will testify he believes there was a modification of the firearm. A few weeks ago before the trial, they took that back. They never solved the question of the lethal bullet because they destroyed the gun and they were left with Alec Baldwin. There will not be one witness or shred of evidence to show Alec knew there was a live bullet. They will tell you evidence of things that had nothing to do with what happened in that church. The armorer was the daughter of the most famous armorer in the business. She was hired by someone else. Safety is ensured by professionals. This wasn't foreseeable, and they must prove beyond reasonable doubt this was foreseeable. He's an actor, and here we are at a homicide trial. He had just got on set. He hadn't been there for days and days. He says you will not hear from the lead detectives in this trial. They will show you bad Alec over and over in movie scenes and try to get you to forget this was a movie set. An actor has never intercepted a live bullet in a movie scene. This was a tragedy, and Baldwin committed no crime. So we move on to the first witness, Nicholas LaFlor. He testified at Hannah Gutierrez Reed's trial, and his inexperience comes into play big time in both of these trials. This guy was on cross-exam by the state and the defense. He got it from both sides. He was the first officer on scene, and dispatch said someone was shot on a movie set. He said his first priority is to preserve life. There were around 100 people present, and they start to play the body cam video of him arriving on the scene. As he arrives, he's looking for his medic bag, and he hands a volunteer fireman a trauma pack that's specialized for a shooting. At this point, Alec Baldwin is watching this footage very closely. His wife and brother are behind him and watching as well. Someone tells the officer which direction the bullet traveled through Miss Hutchins. He asks if a medevac is needed, and someone on that set says yes. The ranch where this was being filmed, by the way, it's pretty remote. It's not easy to get to, and a medevac would have been the quickest way to get her to a hospital. You'll hear much later there were some bad mistakes made as far as her care goes, by the way. You hear Joel Souza crying out in pain in this video, and Miss Hutchins is seen on her back. And just a trigger warning before we go any further, if you're watching on YouTube, I am playing video of this body cam. It does show her lying on the floor. Nothing too graphic, but obviously we know what happens, and it is traumatic any way you look at it. Paramedics arrive, and the lieutenant from the sheriff's office arrives as well. He tells everybody to stop what they're doing, that this is now a crime scene. The state asks the officer, why is Miss Hutchins going into the back of the ambulance instead of a helicopter? And he says to stabilize her while they're waiting. He asks for an estimated time of arrival for the helicopter, and then they show that helicopter arrive. He grabs crime scene tape and said it was a unique scene, so they had to use their patrol cars to tie it because the space was so open. The prosecution points out someone is inside that crime scene tape area who shouldn't be. He informs the EMTs that the medevac is there, and he brings paramedics from the chopper to the ambulance, updating them on her condition. He asks crew for their identification and also for them to wait for investigators to arrive on scene. They ask for the armorer, and a crew member is heard saying on this body cam video that she has green and purple hair and you can't miss her. The officer asks how many people were inside when it happened, and a crew member says 3, maybe 4. And then another crew member says that Alec Baldwin was also in there and he pulled the trigger. The officer walks up to Baldwin, who is on a cell phone and is standing up. Alex says he was the one with the gun, and they jump ahead in the footage. The lieutenant says he has the armor and the gun. Officer LaFlor, who's on the witness stand, asked if he should put Baldwin in the car, and the lieutenant says no. We know where he is, but keep everybody away from him. We see Alec on camera talking to someone who looks like a crew member, and you can hear Alec say something to the effect of the gun should have been empty, or she handed me an empty gun. Then he says when it's loaded, you should have earplugs. The prosecution asked if him talking to people concerned the officer, and he says yes, because one person could be saying what they saw, and it could coerce testimony with others. The witness asked Baldwin who's the director, and a crew member says he was the other person who was shot. On camera, the witness tells Alec Baldwin he can either sit where he is or he can put him in the back of a patrol car, but he would prefer not to put him in the patrol car. The witness explains his car was being used as a post. And the prosecution said, but you gave him an option. He said he wanted to stay there. And the officer said he didn't see an issue until he saw others there talking to Alec Baldwin, So then he told Baldwin to stop talking to the crew members. He admits he did not tell the crew not to talk to Baldwin. The crew member says that Alec's car is over there and points to it. And LaFlor tells Baldwin he can wait in his own car or he can wait there. On camera, the witness says they're still working on Miss Hutchins, and the prosecution asks why the helicopter hasn't taken off yet. He says they were trying to stabilize her. Now, I've talked to a lot of people in the medical field since covering Hannah's trial, and they say this is wrong. You establish the airway and you get her in the air. It was a very long time, over 30 minutes or so, that she was in that ambulance and not on her way to the hospital. In the meantime, this will come out later as well, I'm sure. She was not intubated correctly. They had the tube in the wrong place. She was not getting oxygen, just a whole mess. The officer said he was standing with Baldwin because Baldwin was detained and not free to leave. And that's the reason he stood there with him. He asked Baldwin how many people were inside when the shooting happened, and Baldwin says just crew members. Dave Halls walks up and says there were 6 or 7, and they start naming off people. LaFleur asked for the identification of people who were inside. It ended up being more than the 6 or 7 that was originally said. The prosecution asked if Baldwin is talking to people in this video and says, yeah, he was asking other people who was in the room at the time. The state asked, is this the ideal way to separate witnesses? And he says, in hindsight, no. On camera, the officer is asked about the status of Miss Hutchins, and he said it is questionable. Baldwin is talking about the weapon that was used with the crew, and the prosecution points out again he's not supposed to be talking to anybody. Crew member asked Alec Baldwin if he's okay, and he said he's just worried about Miss Hutchins. And the crew member is explaining the bullet path to Alec that went through Miss Hutchins. The prosecution asked if there's a reason the officer did not stop this crew member from talking to Mr. Baldwin. And the officer said as time goes on, he does ask them to stop. On camera, the witness says that Mr. Souza is doing better than Miss Hutchins, and they may drive him to the hospital instead of medevacing him out of there. At this point in the body cam, he had been on scene for a little over 25 minutes, by the way. The state points out several times that Baldwin is talking to witnesses. The witness later took people to base camp, and that is a central gathering place. It's kind of away from the set where cast and crew gather, and they wait until they're needed on set. He also mentions that someone told him that Mr. Baldwin was the one who pulled the trigger. On cross-exam, Mr. Baldwin's attorney said that Alex said to you he was holding the gun, he was pale, he was an actor out of character, and the witness says, sure. Mr. Baldwin says, I'm here, whatever you want to do. The defense asked the witness if he asked how Miss Hutchins was, and he said yes. The defense points out that the state did not ask him that question, meaning him being concerned about Miss Hutchins. He's asked, was dispatch for this an accidental shooting by a prop gun? And the witness says yes. The defense says, when you described it today, why didn't you say accident? And the witness says, I'm not the one to say if it was an accident. And the witness does admit he made mistakes that day and has learned a lot since then. The defense points out there was a lawyer for the production company on scene, and Alec Baldwin never asked to speak to her. The defense says you were asked 5 times while Baldwin was disobeying your orders, but the body cam doesn't show you going up to people telling them to get out of there. People are coming over to him. One shakes his hand. Have you seen that in your experience in other crime scenes? He says no. The defense also points out there were a dozen other police cars he could have put Alec Baldwin in if needed, and the witness agrees. The defense says later on, Alec Baldwin drove himself to the precinct for questioning. They also say that the Santa Fe Police Department has never arrested Mr. Baldwin, and the witness agrees. They talk about observing demeanor on scene. You saw people who were there that day, one who held the firearm, and there was no intention behind the accident. The witness says he can't speak to Mr. Baldwin's intention, but Mr. Baldwin seemed sad and upset. The defense has him read his earlier testimony, and it says dispatch says it was an accidental shooting with a prop gun. The witness says he took it with how everyone was acting and with Baldwin's demeanor. There wasn't any intention behind that act. There gets to be a sidebar here, and then the defense asked if the witness said that. The witness says he must have, but he does not recall when he said it. He's asked if he spoke to a witness who said that Sarah Zachary, who was the props master, was shaking and crying and going through the bullets, saying she did not know how the bullet got there. He said he doesn't know. And the defense asked for that transcript and they focus on where it says accident over and over. The script supervisor is the one on the 911 call and says the first assistant director should have checked the gun. The defense asked if he heard anyone on that 911 call say Alec Baldwin should have checked the gun, and the witness says no. The defense also presents a pretrial interview transcript of Officer LaFlor for him to review. This interview was on November 30th of 2023. He said it appeared to be an accidental shooting from a prop gun, and I took it from the way people were acting. And also, the one holding the gun was still there and his demeanor meant there was no intention behind the shooting. The state said Alec was disobeying orders by talking to people. Do you feel it's a fair thing to say he was disobeying orders? The witness takes responsibility for this and says he did not tell him twice, but ultimately, Alec Baldwin was disobeying orders to an extent. He's asked, do you know why the armorer loaded the live bullet in the prop gun? He says no. Do you know why the first assistant director didn't check to be sure there were no live rounds? He says no. Cross exam is over. And on redirect, you said it didn't seem like Mr. Baldwin intended to commit the act. Do you know he's charged with involuntary manslaughter? Is that an intentional homicide? They say no. And that's it for this witness who I'm sure could use a stiff drink. The next witness, now retired Lieutenant Benavides. He was the day shift commander the day of the shooting. He was dispatched around 1:50 p.m. and arrived at 2:20. Took him a while to get there. He was in the northern part of the county, and again, the Bonanza Creek Ranch is a pretty remote set. When he arrived, Deputy LaFlor was on scene, and another deputy was directly in front of him responding as well. The first responders were already on scene. He had body cam, which they start to play when he's on the stand. He said that he wanted to secure the crew members and also any film just in case the shooting was caught on film. He said there were people everywhere. There were medics running in and out. There were actors, film crew. It shows him walking to the church and inside. Kind of the same thing we saw in the previous body cam footage, just a little bit of a different angle. LaFleur is seen briefing him on the situation. Lieutenant tells everybody to stop what they're doing because this is a crime scene. He said he needs that film secured. He also said he needs photos taken right away. And he asked, where is the props person? He asked how he knows this is the gun. And you hear Armor Hannah Gutierrez Reed say, that's the gun. And she was carrying it on her person. They show a still from the video and it shows Hannah Gutierrez Reed. They bring out the revolver there in the courtroom and he identifies it. Once he got the revolver from Reed, he put it in the front seat of his police car and locked the door. He said it was the most secure spot he had. And also, he had the most control over that at the time since he was the only one with the key to his cop car. He opened the cylinder and there were no rounds in it. He's asked why he didn't stick that gun in an evidence bag. And he said because the crime scene was so fluid and very active. He put Hannah in the back of his unit and told her that she was not under arrest, but a detective would need to talk to her. He also secured 2 boxes of ammunition that were used for this gun in particular, and they came off of the prop cart. And Hannah, the armorer, was the one who showed where they were. They show a photo of the prop cart and he was directed to it by a crew member who told him none of the guns on that prop cart were used in the shooting. The photo was taken in front of his patrol car. This prop cart was moved by a crew member, which is a huge no-no, obviously, but the witness was dealing with Hannah at the time, and so he watched this crew member roll this prop cart over to his car. He said he moved it because it was evidence. And since Hannah said the ammo used in the church was on that cart, he wanted to bring it there to keep an eye on it. The cart had loose ammunition, gun belts, guns, and various other items. They established that parameter with crime scene tape, and he said people were not allowed inside that area unless you were with law enforcement. They show a photo of the ammunition boxes in his front seat, and they say that they are labeled as 45 long Colt dummies. They were eventually given to a crime scene technician who will testify later today. Hannah, the armorer, asked if the victims are okay, and then Hannah is pointing out the rounds to the lieutenant. From the moment of the shooting, he does not know where the gun was located or who handled it up until the point where he took possession of it. He was on scene for a total of around 6 hours. On cross exam, the defense says when you get on scene, you're heard yelling for the prop person. And when you get to the cart, was it disorderly? He said it was a mess and he does not know if anyone moved anything off that prop cart before he got there. He did not see the prop master, whose name is Sarah Zachary, and she will be testifying later on, I'm sure. He leaves the prop cart, and the man who was there said the weapon used in the church was not on that prop cart, but there were other weapons. The defense says in a typical homicide scene, you would not walk away from weapons, but this was a movie set, and the witness agrees. The defense points out that they're in court after introducing this gun. He is wearing gloves, but on the day of the shooting, when he took possession of the gun, he did not have gloves on. He agrees. He also does not know if law enforcement swabbed the trigger for DNA. The defense shows a photo of rounds and asks if he can tell the difference between dummy and live rounds. And in this photo, he cannot. The defense points out that a request for backup was denied by supervisors. And the defense asked if the supervisors thought this would be unfounded and probably an accident. There's an objection that goes to sidebar. When they come back, the defense says you called for state police and they did not come. The witness says that's correct. The defense asked if the parameter included the prop truck, and the witness says he did not know what a prop truck was. He was trying to take care of what happened in the church. Later on, he learned the prop cart went into that prop truck and it should have been secured within that crime scene parameter. The defense says you don't know how a live round got on the movie set. You don't know why Hannah loaded the live round, and you don't know why the first assistant director failed to detect the live round. The witness says no. On a redirect, they reiterate the cart was a mess and they ask, was the prop cart in a visible place? The witness says it was next to a tent and there were people all around it. He's asked, why did you put Hannah in the back of your car? The witness says she was the main person handling the firearm and detectives would want to speak with her. They asked the witness, were you asked where to place Mr. Baldwin? The witness says that Officer LaFlor asked him, and the witness said he told him to keep Alec Baldwin separated from other people. They ask if the reason was because he wasn't a suspect. The witness says he doesn't remember if anybody told him Alec Baldwin was the one handling the gun. The next witness is Deputy Lujan. He's with the Santa Fe Sheriff's Department. He was on patrol the day of the shooting and responded to the hospital for Mr. Souza, the director, who was shot in the right shoulder. He explains that there was about a half-inch hole to that right shoulder. After he spoke to Mr. Souza, he saw doctors give him medication and then they retrieved that projectile from his shoulder. The projectile was placed into a plastic container and given to the witness. When Santa Fe investigators arrived, he gave that projectile to Marissa Popple, who is the crime scene evidence technician. On cross, he's asked, did Mr. Souza ever mention Alec Baldwin? The witness says no. The last witness of the day was crime scene technician Marissa Popple. Her first job was to photograph the initial scene, including the evidence. She took more photos of evidence back at the sheriff's office for areas of detail that are difficult to photograph on scene. She was also present at the search warrant in the case. She was the PDQ warehouse, the prop supply company that's located there in Albuquerque. That did not take place until a month later. I'm not sure if they're going to get into this PDQ warehouse, but y'all, it was the hot mess express. It looked like somebody ransacked the place, to be honest. They did a search warrant on the prop truck almost a week after the shooting. They bring in the 45 revolver. She was the one that photographed it, and the revolver was then given to the FBI for DNA analysis, fingerprints, as well as firearm testing. When she got it back, obviously the condition had changed. The cylinder was removed and it was separate. And also, an internal component was bagged separate from the firearm. The prop cart had a ton of items on it. There were multiple boxes of ammunition, gun belts with ammunition, earplugs, candy, a fanny pack with various types of ammunition inside, as well as loose ammunition. She explains a dummy round has no gunpowder and a primer is not there. Shaking that dummy round makes a rattling noise. A blank is ammunition with gunpowder, but there's no projectile head. The tip of that is crimped. So there's nothing for gunpowder to project out of the gun. Several rounds did not make the rattle noise, and they had a silver primer instead of brass. Those were sent to the FBI where they were confirmed to be live rounds. A shell casing is what is left behind after the projectile has come out. They show a photo of one that was found on the cart. She collected that from the scene. In all, she collected 5 live rounds on that scene in that one spent casing. She collected a shoulder holster from inside the church that Alec Baldwin was wearing. It also held ammunition. There was another live round in the holster that he was wearing, and they show a photograph of it. When they gathered evidence at the PDQ warehouse, the live rounds were sent to the FBI to compare the live rounds found on set. They were able to confirm through microscopic analysis that the gunpowder inside the rounds that were live from the PDQ warehouse search warrant was not the same gunpowder as the ones found on the Rust set. The witness also collected DNA from David Halls, Hannah Gutierrez Reed, and Lieutenant Benavides. Baldwin's DNA was collected by another agency. And that's where we left off today. She is not finished on direct exam. And tomorrow, when we resume, she'll be back on direct. It's going to be an interesting trial, I think. I don't see any way Alec Baldwin doesn't take the stand. I think he has to get up there and explain his side of the story. Just a reminder, the judge has set a 9-day limit for this trial. I've never seen a judge set a limit for a criminal trial, but here we are. So I think if he does take the stand, it's going to be towards the very end of those 9 days. But that's it for today. We'll be back tomorrow with day two, continuing with this same witness. A big welcome to all the new listeners. Hope you guys have a good rest of your evening, and we will see you soon.